Yeah,
So, welcome, Ben, from Primal Gift.
thank you.
Uh,
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for agreeing to have a chat with me. I saw your interview with Lee Corpus on Kent Carnivore and was just excited to chat to you. I bought some of your products. And so perhaps if you can just introduce yourself and tell me, what you do at Primal Gift and how you came to start doing it.
Yeah. So my name's Ben. I started Primal Gift. I started working on it about a year ago, just over a year. So it's still very early stages. It's just me, still for the moment. And Primal Gift is a wild food company. I have lots of dreams about all the things I could be selling, but for now I'm very focused on pemmican, which I'll maybe talk about in a bit later about what pemmican is. But I the kind of story of how I got there was from the last 2 or 3 years of living and working on kind of organic or ecological farms and kind of getting first-hand experience and learning a lot about our food systems and how we might be able to produce food in an ecological way. And that started with my kind of getting into permaculture. And so I started off thinking I want to be a gardener. Then I tried gardening and I didn't actually like it that much, and I got more into livestock and particularly kind of holistic grazing and agroforestry. And as kind of what I felt were kind of more sustainable ways of producing food, basically. And then subsequently, I got really into wild food, and so Primal Gift is my attempt to kind of make a little living, basically from wild food.
So just maybe now's a good time to just say what pemmican is.
Yeah. So when I was starting, there were kind of various different options, and it was around that time that I was getting quite interested in. I kind of came across the carnivore diet, basically, and so it over the course of a few months, I sort of thought, well, okay, I'd like to make a meat product, and and I was doing a wild food course at the time, and something that came up on it was pemmican, and pemmican is so the word comes as far as I know from the Cree language, who are people that live in kind of the middle of North America, I think in Canada, in the Great Plains region. And the word technically means manufactured grease or fat. So, which tells you a lot about pemmican, because it is a mix basically of fat, usually tallow, or it can come from any animal really, with a powder made from dried meat. And it's kind of the premier way of preserving meat, essentially, particularly in a dry climate, because it's completely dry, doesn't have any water in, and it's because it's got the fat in. The fat keeps out the oxygen, so pemmican can last much longer than, say, for example, jerky. And because it's got the fat, it's also a complete food. So people have lived off pemmican for pretty prolonged periods of time without really much else. So it's a really cool food, and it's kind of been forgotten about. No one really knows what it is, but I'd like to bring it back, basically.
Cool. And I've tried some of it myself, and I'd say I can confirm it's very tasty. And my kids both like it too.
Nice.
You mentioned the carnivore, that you came across the carnivore lifestyle. So when was that? And are you carnivore yourself?
So that was probably the middle of last year. I think I'd been interested in kind of low carb keto diets for a little while. I tried them and had some success with those sorts of diets, and certainly was interested in wild food, and so had come across the paleo diet. And then I think I was sort of scrolling through some podcasts, and I came across Anthony Chaffee's one, and I thought, I the first time I thought that sounds a bit nuts, but it's hooked me. I'm curious, so I listened to one, and I thought, oh, actually, this guy does know what he's talking about. This is quite interesting, and so then I kept listening and came across various other people as well.
So are you carnivore yourself, or are you just still kind of looking into it?
No, I'm not. I'm not strict carnivore. I mean, I mostly eat meat, eggs, and dairy, but I'm not. I have been at times for sort of short periods of time been stricter, but I'm not super strict with it, basically.
Yeah. So I mean, just I mentioned it before, but I have a kind of I've been a carnivore now for a year and maybe 6 months, so a year and a half, and in that time, it's kind of opened my eyes really to a number of things. And being an architect, and having done quite a lot of research into alternative ways of growing foods. So I would say probably 3 or 4 years ago, I did a project for a house in a woodland that got planning approval. And for that project, I had a consultant work with me, a really lovely man called Graham Bell, who passed away, unfortunately. But he introduced me to the kind of the ideas, the design parameters around permaculture and forest gardening and agroforestry. And so that was what I was into at the time. And he helped me kind of design the landscaping for that project in a woodland. And it opened my eyes to the idea that you can improve the biodiversity of a woodland more over and above what it is now. And it made me realize that woodlands perhaps aren't as great a condition in terms of their biodiversity as I had initially thought. So that was like my intro into alternative ways of growing food. And then some years later, when I got into the carnivore diet, for metabolic health, which is, so I'm now a carnivore coach, nutrition coach as well. And so now I realize that we don't need to eat plants, actually. We can rely completely on meats and fats to get all the nutrition that we need. And so it made me realize that there's real potential to completely eliminate in time, perhaps, our monocrop farms, which are so destructive to the environment and wildlife. And, not everyone wants to be a carnivore, obviously, and that's fine. But, perhaps we can use in agroforestry and wilded land where we have free roaming animals. We can improve our landscape, our biodiversity to levels that we could never imagine possible if we just got rid of all the monocrop farms, had forest gardens, agroforestry, which are a way of producing food on a very small, in a dense way, so you can grow lots of high yield crops in a small area in comparison to the monocrops. They don't rely upon any fertilizers or pesticides. And then if you combine that with free roaming cattle for those who want to eat meat, I think we could really transform our British landscape for the better. And then it just, as an architect, it made me start to think about, well, if that were the case, how might that change how we think about our design of our houses in towns and cities and villages? So that's kind of where I come from and what I'm trying to explore. And so I was really interested in talking with people like yourself who are producing food locally, distributing locally. I think it's interesting to talk about this in the context of how we produce local food, support local communities, local farmers. So perhaps I just get your kind of initial feedback or thoughts. When you said, I remember you said you did a course or some courses on permaculture and eating from the land and going back to kind of some traditional skills in foraging and things like that. So, yeah, perhaps could you talk a little bit about that and what you learned and whether you have any kind of thoughts on what I've just said in terms of, what impact we can have if we started to rethink our landscape?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there's massive potential. So I guess my kind of education with all this started with permaculture, which sounds quite similar to your journey, really. Very, I mean, it's not necessarily plant. It's not specifically plant focused. It does definitely refers to animals as well, but is often that tends to be the sort of people it attracts are more kind of gardeners. And so it was only kind of after that and after sort of actually working on farms, I would say, that I kind of got more interested in the animal side of things. But I think where permaculture really excels is in the smaller areas. So I think thinking about potential towns or uh, towns or villages or even cities of the future, I think there's masses of potential for people to be kind of gardening basically on a small scale, if we can kind of increase the amount of green spaces. And in that sort of setting, humans can be a massive kind of benefit to biodiversity by whether it's by producing food with things like agroforestry, or whether it is just planting lots of different species of plants. Often places like gardens and allotments, if they are really gardened, by people, they're often, and they're not kept like super tidy, which is a bit of an issue you often see in gardens and lawns and things. Like, people like things really tidy, which isn't necessarily very good for biodiversity. But in those places like allotments that are often a bit scruffy, a bit messy, but they are gardens, places like that are often way more biodiverse than farmland, because of the way we farm. Often vast swathes of our countryside are, even places that aren't farmed, are often not very biodiverse at all. And that's because, a lot of the large animals generally that would have been there and would have been causing all sorts of different disturbances, aren't there anymore. And the interesting thing about permaculture, is, and that kind of small scale gardening, is that often humans can kind of replicate those ecological kind of forces, that and roles that used to be done by animals that now sadly often are extinct. Uh, but the potential, I think, is massive. Yeah, and then yeah, I'd be a big advocate for rewilding and free roaming herbivores in all the places where there's slightly fewer humans.
So you, am I right in saying you have your own animals and land, or do you, for your pemmican, do you buy that in?
No, so at the moment I only make my pemmican out of venison, and I buy that in at the moment. The hope is that I'm in the process of applying for a gun license and training to be a deer stalker. So I'm hoping that I can be supplying my own venison in the future. But at the moment, I don't have a license, so I'm just buying it for the business. Yeah, and
And
maybe.
I spoke recently to another. Sorry, I spoke recently to another farmer, and I mentioned to him, just off the cuff, a kind of vision I had, whereby we had like an Uber style situation where cows were tagged digitally and they could roam free across north, south of England or Britain. You could monitor them on an app, and farmers could know where they are, sell them perhaps remotely, kind of taking all the best advances in 21st century technology, but really trying to get back to a kind of landscape that, we inherited hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. So I just wonder what you think about that. I mean, you don't have your own land at the moment, it sounds like, but is that something that you would aspire to? And how do you imagine it might work? What's the best way that people can support their local farmers? Because it feels like when I'm buying meat even from the local butcher, they're often supplied by huge companies, massive corporations. So what's your thoughts on, I know there's a lot of questions there, sorry. What are your thoughts on the state of play at the moment with farming and local produce? I'll stop there.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's in a very good state. But generally, I think going back to what you were kind of talking about with the remote control or the remote collars,
Yeah, yeah.
sort of thing. Uh, I think yeah, that could be cool. I think what certainly what you're touching on there is the kind of fact that we have so much advanced technology nowadays that it's just well within our capacity to be rewilding landscapes with free roaming cattle, or the kind of the deer equivalent, for example, is now I still don't think we really know or have any idea how many deer there are in the country, but people are starting to do a pretty good job of measuring how many deer through things like drone surveys. And I think the question that this kind of is about for me is about how can we, like, if our ecological role is as a predator, an apex predator, how can we do that in a way that benefits and supports life as a whole? And we clearly certainly have the technology, if we want to use it in that way, to do that. And we can know exactly how many deer there are, for example, in a certain area, and we can manage that herd very carefully, which is what a lot of Indigenous people uh, have done for thousands of years, is through a very intimate connection with a herd, and then subsequently with domestic animals. And so it's well within our capacities to do that. We just need the kind of underlying value or values around managing animal populations in a way that benefits the animals themselves, and and the ecology. And yeah, that was your first question, and then it was more about general farming practices, or
Yeah, I wonder because my feeling is that things go in circles, don't they? I think, and we're seeing a resurgence, especially from the younger generations. I think in kind of crafts and old artisan kind of ways of eating, and yourself bringing back a kind of perhaps almost lost art of making pemmican. So I feel like there's a resurgence in these perhaps old skills that we might have lost. So, I mean, I think I was trying to get to what are the kind of barriers are you finding any barriers at the moment in getting your business up and running, and how can we best support it other than just purchasing the product, obviously?
yeah, purchasing the product helps. Yeah, I mean, I think the main barrier for me is just that no one knows what pemmican is, and uh, and also to be perfectly honest, it's been a bit of a journey trying to get something that is tasty, and I think it's quite easy to make pemmican that doesn't taste great, and I think I've made a lot of progress, and I think it's going to get hopefully even better. I'm doing a lot of work on the recipe at the moment, but it yeah, how I get it beyond the kind of carnivore community is another question, I think, because that's kind of something I'm working on, trying to create something that's palatable to people that aren't used to a kind of high fat meat based diet. But hopefully most people that are on a carnivore diet, or are keto or animal based, should enjoy it a lot. And I found definitely the more I eat it, the more I enjoy it. So I think there's definitely something going on, a feedback mechanism of my body, thinking, wow, this is really good for me. But yeah, as far as the business is concerned, I think for me, it's just maybe not naturally a natural businessman, not a natural salesman. So that's not something that comes naturally, and I'm hoping I can find other people that might wanna get involved and do some of the stuff that I'm not that good at. But yeah, that's going to take some time. So
Yeah, I mean, there's so many people online talking about the benefits of all sorts of diets, including carnivore. Lots of debate that go on. I'm totally persuaded, obviously, by the health benefits of the carnivore diet, or lifestyle, I should say. And I don't think I need to contribute to that, the discourse around whether or not it's an optimal diet or not. I'm already convinced of that, but I think I would like to kind of take the discussion a little bit further and broaden that discussion a little bit into, okay, if more people did the carnivore diet, what impact might that have, in terms of our landscape and our design of our houses? Because at the moment, what I see is just an increasing densification of our cities at the exclusion of wildlife. And so I like to just question that. Is that a good idea? And should we actually be rethinking the relationship between our housing and our cities and wildlife, letting wildlife back into our cities, and also maybe reconsidering whether or not we should be building on greenfield sites, that we thought perhaps were as perfect as they could be. But, once you start really looking into it and you see that there is actually, our wildlife is it's taken a big hit, really. When you look at most monocrop farms, there's hardly any wildlife there. So that's what I hope to kind of contribute to and get a discussion going around. So yeah, what's the best thing to ask you now? I had something in mind and it's kind of gone from my head.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say I think I'm with you on that. I feel like there's enough doctors and people that know a lot about cholesterol and whatever talking about the health benefits, and like yourself, I'm very interested in just talking to people about kind of the other implications of it, like uh what it means ecologically for ecosystems, connecting the carnivore diet to rewilding, because that's kind of how I see it, as a kind of almost form of nutritional rewilding. But then how does that link to rewilding landscapes, and increasing, and where we live, and cities and towns, and
Whereabouts are you based?
so I'm currently in Hampshire. That's where I run the business out of. I have just moved to. I spend a lot of time in South Wales as well.
And so I think you're aware of the NEP Wilding project.
Yeah, yeah. I've been a couple of times.
Yeah. So I mean, that's, for anyone who doesn't know, it's an amazing project where they have free roaming cows, longhorn cows, and Tamworth pigs and wild ponies, and it's a great place to go and see firsthand what a wilded Britain might look like, I think. And they sell, the meat from that estate. So you mentioned that the pemmican is deer, made from deer, venison.
Yeah.
So are you looking at some stage in the future to broaden that to beef and other meats?
I would be interested if the business were to grow a decent amount, then I'd definitely consider widening it to beef. I mean, ideally, I'd love to work with someone like NEP, where they're kind of free ranging cattle, um, or someone doing kind of holistic plan grazing, that sort of thing. But at the moment, their focus is kind of wild food, so venison the right feels right for the moment, and I, like myself, I would like to be a deer stalker. So yeah, hopefully, who knows? Maybe one day there'll be wild aurochs as well, and I can stalk aurochs. But for now, all the cows are domestic, so it's not so fair.
Yeah.
um,
And you talked about the nutritional value, and is it right to say that pemmican was kind of a survival food, or is it? Can you talk a little bit about the nutritional value of it, and is it something that could be a main part of your diet actually, or is it something that you kind of fall back on when you haven't got fresh meat?
yeah. So to be honest, I have a lot of questions. I haven't found. There's not that much information about pemmican, particularly in terms of how the indigenous peoples of North America kind of used it, whether it was. So I'm still not clear really on whether it was kind of a staple food that they lived off through the winter for almost, almost exclusively, or whether it was just kind of like a travel food. I would suspect it was a pretty important part of their diet for the time of year where, or at least in places where they couldn't hunt easily through the winter. And certainly the history of it is very connected to bison jumps, or kind of where a lot of different tribes will come together around a specific place or cliff, and they'd herd a whole herd of bison off a cliff, basically, and then spend, a month or two processing them, and presumably making a lot of pemmican. So to be honest with you, I don't know exactly whether it was kind of a staple or just a travel food. Later on, it became a staple food for people who were on long expeditions, like Arctic expeditions or fur traders. Uh, so particularly, yeah. So in Canada and North America, people would be going out for 3 or 4 months of the year, trying to trap as many beaver um, and other animals for their furs and their pelts. And during that time, they might try and hunt a bit or fish a bit, but basically they would would have lived mainly off pemmican because they would have needed huge amounts of calories. And um, pemmican is so energy dense. It was kind of the perfect food for that, and there was a big business around it, which, yeah, sadly, when it was kind of commodified, was when uh, was a big reason for the decline in buffalo or bison numbers. Sadly,
Yeah, you've got some great blogs on your website. I had a quick read of some of them that talks about the history of pemmican, and so I'd advise I'll link your website, of course, on the bottom of this, so people can have a look. Yeah, I think your pemmican is 50-50 fat to protein. Is that right?
so it's a bit more meat now than fat. As in, yeah, it's about 60 or 65% meat to fat ratio. Um, because I found the 50%, so 50-50 basically is the traditional recipe, or at least the one that I've found from my research. But when I kind of gave that to people, they generally found it a bit too much fat. So I've kind of, yeah, I've tweaked it a bit so that it's a bit more palatable, basically, to for people. But it's still a very high fat food. So there's, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's important to me. Obviously, as someone who relies solely on meat and fat. Fat is obviously my primary fuel,
Yeah.
and lots of people talk about the benefits of a high fat carnivore diet. So, and I've heard people say that um, wild animals tend to have less fat on them than domesticated, animals. Perhaps grain-fed cattle, for example, would have more fat on them. So, yeah, I mean, is that something that you struggle to get? Did you struggle to get that 50% fat in your product because perhaps there's less fat on the animal itself?
Yeah, good question. So deer are generally, yeah, definitely much leaner than cows or sheep. And yeah, particularly if those cows or sheep are grain fed. But so when I started, I actually did assume that I would have to use I'd be using beef fat, beef tallow. But I came across someone selling all sorts of different types of tallow. It's called the Tallow Man, and he had venison, which I thought was great. And what he does actually is boiling the bones. So most of it comes from the bones. He pressure cooks I guess mainly the femur, or the big leg bones, and that I think produces quite a lot of fat. So yeah, this is kind of I guess it's part of the way that we're not used to eating animals in the way that we used to. Whereas, so something like a deer, for example, if they're quite healthy, they will have quite a lot of fat, and depending on the time of year, but a lot of that fat is going to be marrow. It's going to be in the bones, and
Mhm.
uh, yeah, we're obviously not used to breaking open bones and eating marrow. Often, we tend to just eat the meat, which yeah, from a deer is generally pretty lean. I think.
Yeah, I think, years ago we would have done, I think, um, you know, generations ago, I think we would have eaten the marrow much more than we do. Obviously, I do that now. And, for 12 or so years, in my 20s, I was, or teenage years and 20s, I was a vegetarian. So to go carnivore was quite a big um, jump for me. And it's taken some time, to come round to eating fat as my primary fuel and eating the marrow from the bones. But and so lots of people say it's a journey, through carnivore lifestyle, and I can appreciate that now after a year and a half. And there's the other thing of organ meats as well. I wondered whether do you use any organ meats in your product?
No, not in the pemmican. No, organ meats go off quicker. So I don't know if you could. I haven't tried.
Mhm.
You might be able to dry. I'm sure you could dry out liver and make liver pemmican. I don't know if it would last quite as long. Uh, but but traditionally pemmican was made with the lean meat. Um, the lean meat and then fat from yeah, from the bones, from the often around the kidneys, the suet, um, or back fat, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Um,
What else could we talk about? Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in obviously the housing side and how the effect of wilding and free roaming cattle, free roaming animals. I'm maybe putting you on the spot here, but what are there any barriers? What barriers can you foresee um, to those things actually happening? What are the barriers that you see for having more free roaming cattle apart from land ownership? And I mean, I suppose there's kind of the health and safety aspects of it that people might bring up. Can you talk from your experience of working with farmers, and have you got anything to say on that at all? Might put you on the spot. Sorry.
that's right. Yeah, I think Nep's really interesting. If anyone gets a chance, definitely go and visit. It's a weird experience because you feel like you're just going for a walk in the English countryside where there's no dangerous wild animals generally. So you're just going for a walk with other dog walkers and whatever, but the landscape looks completely different, and it looks, presumably a lot more like uh, the the British landscape would have looked like once upon a time. And yeah, and then you come across these animals which are kind of, they're not wild, so they don't, they don't run away, or apart from the deer. And it is very funny. It's kind of both very wild and very kind of safe and not wild at the same time. But I think ultimately the main barrier is our relationship with wildness. We in I mean, in the UK, our relationship with wildness is just so broken, and it's something that we fear. Really deep down, we fear wildness. And the things we sort of can't control, uh, and that's we have to get over that. If we want to live in a world that is biodiverse and has all these wonderful species that we should be living around, then we need to get over that. And I think, I think I'd hope kind of the pull of kind of just the awe, the and the wonder of the idea of living in a landscape where you can walk around and you can see wolves or elk, or who knows, maybe even elephants or rhinos or whatever it is to me incredibly enticing. I'd love to live in that world, and I want to live in a wilder world, but it's we have a very deep fear of that in the UK, and it's gonna be a long road trying to get over that.
Yeah, I really identify with what you just said there. I mean, I grew up in the Lake District for part of my life, and I used to go camping in the forest and near quarries, and with my friends, we used to go climbing and have campfires and things like that. And I was a scout my whole life. So, I feel like I did benefit from a kind of wild, relationship with the wilderness. And obviously now, well, a lot has changed since then. More people, lots of the places I used to go are now national parks, and you're not allowed to camp unless you got specific permission. So we've kind of ring fenced all the remaining, and I understand why, of course, to protect it. But we've ring fenced all our remaining biodiverse areas to try in an attempt to protect them as much as we can. But really, all it's done is, in my opinion, is just made them kind of untouchable. And I don't think we're really protecting them long term, because our cities are just expanding and we're encroaching more and more on these small areas that we've got left. I read a book recently, Britain's Rainforests. Can't remember who the guy, can't remember the author's name. And that we do have some rainforests in Britain. They're only a few left in very small areas. And so I do like the idea of just having this discussion about getting back, just helping people understand that we need to create more of these types of biodiverse spaces and landscapes, and as you say, reconnect with nature, but not do it in a way that it's kind of nature over there and housing over here. I think we have to start talking about how can we redefine our domestic relationship with wildlife. So I don't have the answer yet.
Yeah. I mean,
and perhaps people can comment with some ideas about how we might do it. That's the reason for me starting these videos.
I mean, we've been eating all this animal fat during our evolution. Now we've got these big brains, and we just need to use them and to work it out, because humans can be such a benefit, such a positive force. And I think, I hope the rewilding movement is kind of is showing that, and is showing how we can, particularly now with modern technology, we can we can bring back all these species that we've lost, and let's not, what a great opportunity. But something I'm really passionate about is kind of, that you alluded to, is it not being like a tourist attraction, it not being like something that happens over there with our cities that continue to grow and kind of intensify. And then you've got some rewilded land that you can pay large amounts of money to go and visit as well. And how we come up with a much more integrated kind of vision where we're, meeting human needs essentially from those rewilded landscapes. And I think the crossover with the carnivore diet there is quite interesting, because I'm a big advocate for reintroduction of large herbivores into landscapes. Doing that with cattle to begin with is brilliant, because they're obviously domestic and not so dangerous. But hopefully in the future, other animals like bison and elk and lots of other things in the future, and that can also be a source of food. We can be a part of that ecosystem, and eat those animals in a way that is sustainable, so that their populations are kept in check, but also aren't over hunted as well. And that to me is really exciting. It's kind of, it's part of the story that I think doesn't get talked about enough, which is how, or the ways in which humans can benefit from wilder landscapes. And the way I see it, essentially, the better job we do at creating a more biodiverse, more bio-abundant world, almost the higher up the food chain we can be. As the human population has grown over the last kind of 10,000 years, since we started, since the kind of beginning of the agricultural revolution, humans have essentially got lower and lower down the food chain, and based on I think what the carnivore diet and lifestyle is saying is that actually that's not necessarily a good thing as far as we're concerned in our health. So I see the two things as very connected. If we can create a much more wilder, abundant world, then there's more of the food that we would want to eat, and that is very connected to our own well-being.
I think that's really important. What you just said is in terms of the bigger, broader picture of well-being. I know myself intuitively whenever I go out, and talking about metabolic health, whenever I go out camping, or if I spend time in the sun and touching the ground, people talk about grounding. I don't know if people who are watching will know what that is, but maybe I'll talk about that some other time. But that physical connection with the ground, I know myself that it has a positive impact on me. I always feel much more relaxed after I've been camping. I don't know if you've experienced that as well. When you're out in nature, touching the ground, I can feel the physical benefit from that. And I've done that obviously many times over my life. And if I have long extended periods without doing that, I can, you kind of feel the tension build up in your body. So I think it's really important, for us to strive to maintain that connection with nature, and especially with our housing, allow those opportunities to connect with nature on a kind of daily basis. Getting enough sunlight, get enough time outside so that you've got, outside access. Just thinking back to the lockdowns, in 2021, when everybody had such a variety of experiences, when they were locked up, with, depending on where you were, how much access you had or not to external spaces like that. And I see, the wilded landscape as, providing so many benefits. Not obviously, I have an interest in the carnivore lifestyle in terms of metabolic health and nutrition, as a nutrition coach, but also from mental health, access to seeing animals, being around animals. I think there's lots of evidence to suggest that that's good for our mental health as well. And obviously lots of people don't have access to that. So there are so many things I think a wilded Britain could benefit. So yeah, there's so many things.
Yeah. No,
perhaps that's a good place to stop for now.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel.
Yeah.
Because we can reflect on this conversation and then maybe come back another time and have another discussion.
Yeah, sounds good. I've really enjoyed chatting to you. Definitely.
Well, I mean, thanks so much for coming, and I'll link your website obviously to this video once it's posted. And good luck with your endeavors.
Thank you.
And I'll be watching out to see how you kind of progress and expand your business, which is, it's a brilliant product. I love the taste of your pemmican, and I'll be buying some more. And I wish you all the success with it. I think it's a great contribution, to the kind of things that I'm interested in terms of local food production, and I wish you all the best.
Oh, thank you. That's great to hear someone's read the blog as well. That's very motivating. I'll get on and write some more. Yeah, cool.
Great,
thank you.
good stuff.
Have a great rest of your day.
I will do. Cheers, Ben.